From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. More protests at UT Austin lead to more arrests and more questions from lawmakers about the university and law enforcement's response. Plus, the November election is 6 months away, and we're getting a look at how voters feel about some of the candidates. More on those stories in just a minute, but first, let's get to the 3 things you need to know in Texas politics. South Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar and his wife are facing multiple charges for allegedly accepting $600,000 in bribes between 2014 and 2021. Federal investigators filed charges Friday saying the Democrat and his wife took bribes from an oil and gas company owned and controlled by the country Azerbaijan and from a bank headquartered in Mexico City, agreeing to benefit them in his role as a congressman. Hours before the news broke, Congressman Cuellar released a statement saying he and his wife are innocent. Texas Governor Greg Abbott ordered the TEA to ignore a Biden administration policy meant to protect LGBTQ plus students. The administration revised Title IX last week. It's the law banning sex-based discrimination at schools that receive federal funding. The definition of sex now includes a person's gender identity. On social media Monday, the governor wrote, quote, "Congress wrote Title IX to protect women. Biden, with no authority to do so, rewrote Title IX to protect men who identify as women," end quote. That same day, Attorney General Ken Paxton announced Texas is suing the federal government to try and stop the change. On Tuesday, Attorney General Paxton joined former President Donald Trump in the courtroom for his hush money trial. Photojournalists captured photos and videos of the AG with the former president and his entourage. Paxton posted on social media, writing he's with President Trump to, quote, "sit through this sham of a trial," end quote. Paxton also called the trial a, quote, "travesty of justice," end quote, and says he stands with Trump. For a second week, several pro-Palestinian protests happened at the University of Texas at Austin. And for a second week, dozens of protesters were arrested, raising questions about the university's response. Some of those questions come from Austin's state senator, Sarah Eckhardt. She joined me to talk about what's happening. You know, you expressed some concerns about what was happening at UT with the pro-Palestinian protesters and specifically the law enforcement response. You actually went to the university on Monday. Tell us about that.
I did. I was there for several hours. The response did seem to be large, expensive, and frightening, frankly, given what they were dealing with. So I was concerned that we weren't sticking to time, manner, place restrictions on freedom of speech, and that we weren't applying it neutrally. And I remain concerned about that. You actually had a conversation with the president of the university, a text message, I believe, exchanged with him. What did you learn? What was that? What did that include? Well, that was from the week before, and it was a very helpful exchange. I appreciate my open line of communication with President Hartzell, and he was very open with me that he had asked for the additional assistance for UT police because of what he was concerned. He was concerned about what he was seeing at other universities. And I share those concerns with him, but I also am very concerned about preempting free speech and not having appropriate time, place, and manner restrictions on the free speech. Yeah. You know, the Board of Regents really kind of doubled down this week on their response, and even went as far as to say they will continue to call on DPS. In fact, we saw law enforcement called to UT Dallas, earlier this week, and they say that's partly because of some of the violations they were seeing. They sent us a list of violations, which they say included erecting tents, being in an unauthorized area. They said there were weapons, rocks. They plan to, we have now learned, file criminal charges because of a possession of a gun. Your response to that, given what they're saying they're seeing on the ground? There does seem to be a delta between the list of weapons and offenses that they list, because then you look at the charging instruments, what's actually been charged, and we're not seeing those offenses. With more than 100 arrests and more than 100 charges, we've seen one assault. You're telling me that there's now a weapons charge?
It's soon to come. They're saying that there will be a soon to come with the Travis County District Attorney's Office.
So it sounds like there's one assault charge, one weapons charge, and one obstructing of a highway out of more than 100 charges. So that is that seems to be in contrast to what the university has been saying.
Where do we go from here?
I think where we go from here, protest is a part of our history. And it's a great way to get heard on issues that are difficult to get heard on. But it's not a great way to get understanding. You have to follow up the protest with really meaningful dialogue so that we can achieve understanding. And there's no better place for that than universities. And the University of Texas is so well resourced to have this conversation. And I hope to be a part of that conversation moving forward.
As we inch closer to the November election, we're learning how Texas voters feel about some of the candidates. The team at the Texas Politics Project at UT Austin released a new poll this week. Director Dr. James Henson joined me to talk about the results. You know, anytime we talk about a poll, I want to start off by talking about the methodology. What did you guys do this time around?
So we did what we've done, pretty much since 2008. We looked at the attitudes of 1,200 registered voters, collected data over the internet, but using YouGov, kind of the gold standard for using the internet to poll. We were in the field collecting data from in basically the middle of April, like about the 11th to the 22nd, I think, were the exact dates.
Yeah. We're still a ways off from November, but how's that presidential matchup? How's that presidential race looking?
Well, it's looking a lot like we might expect in terms of looking at the history of where presidential election results have been in Texas for the last few years. So we did two different what we call trial ballots, where we put President Biden, former President Trump in the field with three other candidates, independent and third-party candidates. And then we did one head-to-head, just Biden and Trump, and they came out pretty close to the same in the five candidate field. I think President Biden was 8 points behind, Donald Trump led, and then in the more direct head-to-head, it was a 9-point lead. So.
And again, not surprising for Texas.
No, I mean, if you think, the last election, former President Trump won Texas by about 5.5 points. Mm-hmm. So it's a little more space, but, I appreciate you starting out saying it's April. I mean, nobody should expect that any polling they've seen to date is going to be predictive of what we see on Election Day. That said, we see some things that explain why the gap is a little bit bigger than we saw last time. President Biden not running as well among independents or as among Latinos as he did as he was doing at this point in the last election. So he's lost a little ground. Some of that has to do maybe with changes in attitudes of those groups. Some of it has to do with just being the incumbent president and people blaming you when things are not going right in their view.
One of the things I thought was interesting was some of the concerns and the lack of concern that Texans have about some of the candidates. Specifically, when we look at President Biden, Democrats concerned about his age.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important a little bit to set up how we did this. So we asked people after they made their choices in those trial ballots, do you have any concerns about your candidate? Mm-hmm. And gave them just what we call an open-ended response. They could just tell us what they thought. More Democrats had concerns about President Biden than Republicans had concerns about former President Trump. And among those Democrats who had concerns about President Biden was overwhelmingly about his age or some related aspect of his health. Way more than half of Democrats who had concerns said that was their top concern. Much more of a spread with President Trump. Only 7% of Republican voters that had concerns said that they were concerned about President Trump's age, even though he's only a few years younger than President Biden. Mm-hmm. The most common concern, and it was only in the low double digits that Republicans expressed, was about President Trump's legal troubles, but that was only in the teens. So the concerns were spread out and at a much lower level among Republicans. Overwhelming concern among Democrats is President Biden's age and his health.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about another race, and that is the race for the U.S. Senate. U.S. Senator Ted Cruz facing off against Congressman Colin Allred. We know who's raising the most money out of this race, but in the polling, something different.
Yeah, right now, we found Ted Cruz leading Colin Allred by double figures. I mean, I think the gap was around 14 points in that neighborhood. We're seeing that the main problem here for Colin Allred is that there are still a lot of undecided Democrats. About 15% of Democrats said that they didn't really know who they were going to vote for. In another measure of his favorability, about 30% didn't have a view of him. So I think part of what we're seeing here is the fallout from Colin Allred's success in some ways in the primary. The Democratic primary had very low turnout. He campaigned like an incumbent the whole time, and that race just didn't engage a lot of Democrats. It worked for Colin Allred, make no mistake about that. He avoided a runoff in a crowded field. But I think some of the fallout is that a lot of Democrats are just not paying attention to that race yet.
Henson's team also talked with Texans about what they think is the most important issue facing the state, abortion and the economy. You can find more from our interview on KVUE streaming platform KVUE Plus, which is available on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV. That's Texas This Week.